Welcome back to another episode of The Loco Fit Show, where we redefine what healthy means to you. I'm your host, Lauren Conlon, and today's solo mini-sode is about walking. Y'all know I talk about walking all the time. And this was actually a really great question that I got during a client consult the other day. And she asked me, is walking cardio? And like I said, I talk about walking all the time, but I thought this was a really great time to distinguish what constitutes, I guess, as cardio in terms of walking. What are some of the benefits? So in the short term, or the short answer is yes and no, right? Walking can be cardio, but it can also not be considered cardio. So if we want to go through some of the zones, a lot of people talk about zone training, and I just think that it's a nice representation. So I want to read through this chart. This is actually one of the charts that we have on Body Blueprint on one of the later tabs. So zone 1 would be like 50 to 60% of your max heart rate. Think warm up, recovery. I could do this all day. Zone 2, about 60 to 70% of that max heart rate. Light aerobic work. It's pretty easy, but you're like, okay, I'm exercising. Zone 3 would be more 70 to 80% max heart rate. This is more aerobic. This is more moderate in nature. Okay, now I'm working. Zone 4, 80 to 90% max heart rate. This is at your kind of threshold. This is very challenging. This is hard. And then lastly, zone 5 would be above 90% max heart rate. This is above your threshold. This is very hard. This is all out. I can't keep this up for very long. So when we're talking about, are we talking about getting steps in cardio, right? Like, are we just like, hey, just going to go for a 10-minute walk, going to go do a loop, going to go, walk my dog, going to go, just take a lap around the neighborhood or something like that. That is what I would consider that kind of zone 1 recovery walk. I could do this all day. Conversation is obviously easy. You can still typically keep a conversation during zone 2, but it might be slightly labored, right? Whereas zone 1 is kind of we're just going for a walk. And this would be what we would talk in terms of like increasing your step count and all of that. But that wouldn't necessarily be considered when we're talking about, are we talking about cardio to improve are we talking about using cardio to improve cardiovascular fitness? We're not really going to get those same benefits there. That is just very different. So from a performance perspective, no. From a health perspective, from a cognitive perspective, from a daily activity perspective, yes, walking is certainly great. But in terms of it being cardio, right? I'm doing quotes on the screen if you're watching YouTube, or most people would what is cardio? That's going to be a little bit harder. That's going to be more of a push. And walking can't be cardio if you do it hard enough, right? If you are walking fast enough and you're getting your heart rate up enough. So when I was doing my bodybuilding preps, I pretty much only exclusively walked for cardio. I was always really banged up. If you guys have been following for a hot minute, I've had every injury in the fucking book. They're always the kind of slow, nagging injuries that are just always persistent. And it's, of course, the low body fat, the always posing, the overtraining of lower body, especially glutes and hips and all this. So I was always a little bit banged up. So for me, I always found that walking was the best way for me to stay as healthy as possible and be able to resistance train. And for me, cardio at that point was a tool to get leaner, but I needed the resistance training to keep my muscle mass and keep that shape that I needed for the show. So for me, I would always walk for my cardio, and I would consider that, but I was walking fast enough. So either you are walking on a flat surface fast enough. I actually had to do that a lot of the time. If I was on a treadmill, I could put a slight incline, but if I had any kind of high incline, that would really bother my hip, which was a point of contention for many, many years. So for me, a lot of times it was flat, but I was just walking very fast, and I have long legs, so I understand that I can walk a little bit faster maybe than most people. But if you are walking outside, you could add a weight vest. A lot of people love adding weight vests. If you are somewhere that is a hilly area, right, or you live somewhere that's mountainous, of course, walking on an incline or up and down these hills will make it more challenging. But just make sure if you are going to use walking as a form of cardio for your training programming and for your goals, that it is challenging enough. Obviously, if you have very specific performance goals, it's going to really depend. Like if you were trying to be an endurance athlete, you're most likely going to need to run in order to see those same benefits. That's pretty obvious. So any type of very specific performance goal is going to require more specific types of training. But if we're just talking about cardiorespiratory fitness, we're talking about fat loss goals, you can certainly use walking as your cardio, Just make sure that it is hard enough with your heart rate and that you're going fast enough. But outside of that, walks have so many benefits. And I know, like I said, I kind of weave this content in through different posts and, podcasts. I actually made, when I did some content the other day with my friend Taylor, who's amazing. We will tag him or put him in the show notes. He has phenomenal content. So if anybody is in the Tampa St. Pete area, he does really, really great work. So we were doing some content and I was like, listen, okay, I know this is going to sound crazy. I was like, can we make a walking reel? And I was like, okay, film like these different angles or whatever. Like, how do we make walking look cool? But he made walking look fucking rad. And it was a really great reel. So thank you, Taylor. And I talked about it there and just on a different podcast, I know, but walking is going to, like we already discussed, boost your daily activity in your steps, which is going to just help control your body composition and just, help you feel better overall. It's going to make you feel a lot more energetic. The times where I feel the least energetic is actually when I'm doing less. Now, there is always a point of diminishing returns. When you are doing too much of anything, you're also going to feel tired. That is obvious. But a lot of times when I'm feeling like I'm just dragging ass or I'm tired throughout the day, or I'm like, oh, I don't want to do anything. I find that the days that I string together low activity, whether it's not a lot of, physical exertion with walking or training or any kind of output, I actually start to feel a lot worse. And again, there is a point of diminishing returns. I'm not saying go balls to the walls, train twice a day, 7 days a week. That's not what I'm saying. But if you keep up your daily activity, you're going to feel so much more energetic. Second, you're going to see some blood glucose and insulin control from the walks. There's actually been research published on this. If you guys follow Stan Efferding, he talks about the 10-minute walks. He kind of coined that, but there is actual research on that. And they've shown that there was either 30-minute walks or 3 10-minute walks after meals, and that was actually better at controlling blood glucose and insulin. So again, just another regulatory thing. It also helps with digestion, especially after a meal. I feel so much better, especially after like a heavy meal. It's like, okay, let's go for a walk. If you can time this up with AM and PM light, you're going to be getting light exposure at the right times of day to help set your circadian rhythm, improve your mood, improve your sleep. You're just going to feel so much better. This is not a requirement, right? I'm not going to say that if you can't get as the sun is coming up, like within an hour of getting up, and then also, as the sun is kind of coming down later in the day, if you can't get those times, that doesn't mean skip the walks. That just means if you can time your walks around those times, it's going to be even more beneficial, but there are still distinct benefits of walks and just being outside at other times of the day, just getting sunlight. Most of us are stuck inside all day, and even with a bright window, you're still just not getting the same light to your eyes. And another thing too is that when you are outside, you're able to expand your visual field. So again, think about what most of us are doing. Most of us are on our phones, which are close and small screens. Most of us are on laptops or tablets or maybe even multiple ones. And we have a very narrow field of vision given, what we're working on. And it can create some of this like screen and eye related fatigue, just kind of fatigue in general and some headaches. I think anybody who's listening, who's been on the computer for long enough knows that feeling that I'm talking about. You're just very like fuzzy and your head hurts and maybe your eyes hurt. So if you're outside and you're able to expand your field of vision, so instead of just looking down, which most of us do when we're walking, you can look up and look out and try and expand this field. And Dr. Huberman does a really great job of talking about this in terms of the AM and PM light exposure, as well as expanding your visual field. I believe these are some of his very first podcasts. This is actually how I got hooked on Huberman Lab. I believe it's some of the very first ones that he talks about all of this stuff with the AM and PM light exposure. And certainly he weaves it into other concepts as well. And the titles on his podcast do a pretty good job of explaining what he's going to be talking about. And then lastly, the cognitive benefits of walking are just unmatched. There is just so much mental clarity that you get from walking. It allows for better stress management as well. I find that when we have low-level anxiety, we kind of have this low-level agitation, like in our body, and this feeling. Walking and just doing this like lightly active activity really seems to help, at least me, and I'm not sure if anybody listening can relate to that. But whenever I'm kind of feeling agitated, lightly doing something, and this doesn't just have to be a walk. This could be, cleaning a little bit, okay, let me go clean the counters. I'm not saying you need to deep clean your house for 5 hours, but hey, let me just clean the kitchen counters, or hey, let me just run a vacuum, or hey, let me go fold that laundry. Something lightly physically active really seems to help when I'm agitated. And I know a lot of other people can relate. I found that this helps clients too when they're feeling that agitated feeling around food as well. Like, okay, I feel like I might overeat. I feel like I might binge. I'm kind of in this weird spot. And there's always that kind of few second gap where you're like, okay, this is it. I'm either going to make this decision or not. And I find that taking that step back and doing something lightly active can stop that cue. But there's just something about walks that allow you to process things. And if you guys listened to the podcast on being present, when I asked what are some of the tools that people are using to allow themselves or to work on being more present, the most popular answer was walking. So I know that it's not just me. I know that it's certainly other people in the audience who are listening and who will happen to be on my Instagram poll for that exact situation that I was asking about. But there is just something about the mental clarity and working through problems. And when I'm walking, sometimes it's like I really want to like jam out and listen to music and like be upbeat and like kind of, you know, just be feeling really good. There's other times where I'm like emo vibes all day. And you guys, if you know, you know. So I'll be putting on emo kind of music, and that could just be just like emotional, not necessarily like emo, screamo type music, but just anything that'll be kind of, you know, get in my feels. But sometimes that's what I need and what I want. Other times I'm listening to an educational audio, whether it's like a podcast or, you know, the meditation app that I use, Waking Up, has a lot of great audios on there. I'm not really an audiobook person per se, especially for a walk. Like I can do that if I'm on like a long drive. I cannot commit to an audiobook unless I am in almost like a trance, you know, like when I'm driving, which that sounds unsafe, but you guys know what I mean. Like if I'm not going to be interrupted, maybe is a better way of describing it. Don't worry, I am paying attention when I'm driving. I'm not in a trance, but you know, when you're driving for 2 hours, that's very different than driving 20 minutes or going on a 10-minute walk. Like I can't just start an audiobook in that kind of a time. It just doesn't work for my brain personally. And then also sometimes just going in silence, you know, sometimes literally walking around in silence, listening to, you know, what is like the wind and the birds and just the different sounds, but also just allowing whatever to process through you. And you're able to sometimes hear things better in that way because you're creating that space to allow yourself to hear and feel those things. So I can't speak highly enough about walking, clearly, but if you're using it in terms, if the question is walking cardio, the answer is yes and no. Make sure that it is going to be hard enough for you to get your heart rate up if we're talking about improving cardiorespiratory fitness and, you know, assisting fat loss goals, creating a calorie deficit. But if we're just talking about steps and mental clarity and some other health benefits, slow walking where we're thinking that kind of warm up recovery, I could do this all day type of walk, that is going to have a lot of benefits as well. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it. That is the best way that you can support us. You can visit teamlocofit.com to learn more about our coaching services, as well as sign up for our newsletter where you'll be the first to hear about the app that is releasing very, very soon. So excited for this. And you guys know I've been talking about this for months, so I cannot wait for it to finally be released. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk to you on Wednesday.